The snow had not stopped falling for days, smothering the Siberian mining outpost beneath a silent, relentless weight. Beneath the ice, men with drills and cutters had chased veins of rare earth minerals until one machine struck something harder than granite. At first, the workers thought it was another stubborn rock shelf, until the drills began sparking wildly and the sensors returned readings no human metallurgy could explain. Word spread quickly, an alloy that registered as unbreakable, alien in every measurable sense. Dr. Marcus Hale stood at the edge of the excavation, his breath curling in the freezing air as he adjusted his spectacles. Once, his name had graced scientific journals across the world. Now he was a figure half forgotten, summoned from obscurity because no one else could make sense of what lay buried. He leaned forward, brushing a gloved hand along the blackened surface jutting from the ice, and whispered a truth he could scarcely believe: this was no natural formation. Colonel David Cross kept his distance, a rigid figure in a dark parka with his boots planted firmly on the frozen ground. The former commander of an orbital strike division, Cross had the look of a man who trusted nothing but steel and firepower. His scarred jaw worked in silence as he observed the excavation site. Where Hale saw history and knowledge, Cross saw danger. The men under his command had died facing weapons that were still human in design. The thought of something not of this world made his blood run cold. Yet he was here because he knew what was coming. Humanity did not stumble on such things by chance. If the aliens had abandoned it, then perhaps they meant to return. Down in the trench, half buried in snow and grease, Liam Vega tightened a final bolt and slapped the side of his generator with satisfaction. The machine hummed to life, flooding the pit with harsh white light. He was the youngest in the team by decades, a mechanic with more instinct than training, but his modifications had kept the project alive when the standard equipment faltered. Oil streaked his cheeks like war paint, his dark eyes gleaming with excitement at the sight before him. While others hesitated, he embraced the impossible, muttering to himself that if something could be built, then it could be rebuilt. As the night wore on, the outline of the buried mass grew clearer. It was not a fragment but a vessel, sleek and terrible, its surface unmarred by time. What looked like wounds were instead access hatches, seamless yet deliberate, as though the ship were waiting for someone persistent enough to open it. Hale paced around the excavation, his voice low but fervent. He argued that humanity stood at the threshold of rewriting its destiny. Cross countered with warnings of contagion, sabotage, or worse, that unlocking it might signal the original owners. Their exchanges grew heated, carried by the wind across the barren tundra. Vega ignored their quarrels and set about running lines from his generator directly into a protruding conduit. The others laughed at his audacity. Hale demanded patience, Cross barked about safety protocols, but the mechanic pressed on. He had no use for theory or procedure, he wanted proof. He connected a makeshift coupling, sparks cascaded, and for a heartbeat nothing happened. Then the ground shuddered, and the vessel stirred as if exhaling after centuries of silence. The trench erupted in shouts as the buried Starship awakened. Bands of light coursed along its hull, alien glyphs igniting with a glow that bled through the ice. A vibration filled the air, not just sound but resonance that rattled bones and teeth. The workers scrambled back, some crossing themselves, others frozen in awe. Hale dropped to his knees, staring at the glowing inscriptions, deciphering fragments of meaning with the hunger of a man who had chased the unknown all his life. The symbols shifted and reorganized, translating themselves until the message was unmistakable: it was left behind for the ones who endure. Cross lifted his rifle, though he knew it was useless against something of this magnitude. His instincts screamed that they had just announced themselves, that someone somewhere had felt the tremor of the awakening. He turned to Hale, his voice a growl. Humanity had inherited something it could neither contain nor control. Hale, eyes alight with triumph, replied that perhaps for the first time mankind had found proof that it was chosen, not forgotten. Vega stood between them, hand still resting on the conduit he had forced open. He felt the hum of energy vibrating through the cables, alive and waiting. His grin faded as he realized the enormity of what he had done. The ship responded not to scholars or soldiers but to the stubborn hands of a mechanic who refused to let dead machines stay dead. The lights across the hull stabilized, pulsing like the heartbeat of a slumbering giant. The storm overhead thinned, revealing a sky heavy with stars. For the first time, the mining outpost did not feel remote but like the center of something vast and terrifying. The air crackled with potential. Cross broke the silence, his voice low but certain. "Not there's any more," he said. "It's ours." The others exchanged uneasy looks, the enormity of the moment pressing upon them. Hale's chest rose with anticipation, Vega's hands trembled with equal parts fear and exhilaration, and Cross kept his hand steady on his weapon as if sheer discipline could anchor them all. Somewhere deep inside the vessel, unseen gears turned, and systems long dormant came alive. The awakening was not complete, but enough had stirred to make one truth undeniable. Humanity had found its inheritance, and whether it was salvation or damnation, they had already crossed the threshold. The snow continued to fall, soft and indifferent, as though the earth itself cared little for what had just begun. But every man present knew the world would never be the same again. The vessel was too large to remain hidden in Siberia for long. Within months, a fleet of carriers and cargo lifters hauled its fractured hull into orbit, where the first orbital drydock in human history was hastily expanded to contain it. The structure hung above the Earth like a crown of steel, illuminated by countless floodlights, swarming with shuttles and workers in suits. From the ground it appeared as a new star, a reminder that humanity's reach had extended beyond the soil and into the realm once reserved for myth. Marcus Hale stood in the command gallery of the station, his face lit by the ghostly glow of alien schematics unraveling across transparent screens. His hands trembled whenever the ship's interior revealed another layer of incomprehensible design. Each curve of alloy, each system buried beneath the hull, whispered of civilizations beyond imagination. He had built his life on theories of propulsion and dark energy, dismissed as impractical by lesser minds, and now he held the living proof that he had never been wrong. Yet knowledge without control was dangerous, and with every breakthrough came a reminder of how little they understood. David Cross entered without ceremony, his boots clicking against the steel floor. He had the bearing of a man who believed in command by presence alone, his voice sharp, his instructions short. He respected Hale's brilliance but despised the recklessness that came with it. To Cross, the vessel was not a library of secrets but a weapon waiting to be reforged. He had already overseen the installation of human gunnery stations along its spine, crude compared to the alien mechanisms but functional enough to project strength. He envisioned not a monument to curiosity but a fortress that could defend Earth when the unknown owners returned. In the lower decks, Liam Vega was already at work. He moved like a man in love, tracing conduits with gloved fingers, murmuring half-thoughts as he tested connections. He had become indispensable, the one who could coax dormant circuits into life with improvised tools and human stubbornness. Where Hale struggled with translation and Cross-imposed discipline, Vega turned chaos into function. He welded human reactors into alien sockets, bent piping to fit where it had no right to fit, and cursed the engineers who doubted him until they admitted his results worked. The ship was alien, but it was being remade by human hands, piece by imperfect piece. Weeks passed in a blur of construction, failure, and discovery. Hale uncovered a power lattice that made nuclear fission appear primitive, though he warned that the slightest miscalculation could vaporize the station. Cross ordered redundancies, demanding human overrides at every level, unwilling to trust an energy source he could not fully contain. Vega acted as the bridge between them, arguing that alien systems required human improvisation rather than bureaucracy. Their arguments grew louder, echoing through the hollowed chambers of the Starship until the workers learned to step aside when the three men crossed paths. The name came during one of these disputes. Hale spoke of exploration, of reclaiming humanity's birthright among the stars, while Cross insisted on deterrence, on forging a sword rather than chasing a dream. It was Vega who interrupted, his voice raw with exasperation, declaring that the ship was neither Hale's dream nor Cross's weapon but a chance for humanity to strike back at the universe that had always treated them as fragile and temporary. Retribution, he muttered, the word heavy on his tongue. It stuck, and from that day forward no one called the ship anything else. As Retribution took shape, its human modifications gave it a strange, almost defiant beauty. Steel plating patched gaps in its smooth hull. Antennae and turrets jutted where the alien design had left no space for them. Some whispered that humanity was corrupting a perfect design, but others believed the vessel had always been meant for hands like theirs, not to be preserved but to be transformed. Each day the ship grew less alien, more a mirror of the species that claimed it. Tensions sharpened as progress accelerated. Hale pressed for activation of an artificial intelligence nested deep within the ship's core, convinced it held the knowledge to unlock the remaining systems. Cross rejected the idea outright, warning that to awaken it was to invite corruption or even subjugation. The colonel argued that the moment an alien voice spoke through their ship, humanity would no longer own it. Hale countered that ignorance was a slower form of suicide, that enemies approaching from the stars would not be defeated with half-understood engines. Vega remained silent in these exchanges, though his sleepless eyes betrayed his own unease. Late one night, as the station drifted over the Atlantic, Vega sat alone in the engineering chamber. He had patched another coolant leak with a section of repurposed piping, and now he watched the conduits thrum with borrowed energy. He thought of his family lost during the collapse of an orbital elevator years before, victims of human arrogance and failure. This ship, he believed, could make that kind of tragedy impossible, or else magnify it 1,000-fold. He was terrified of both outcomes, yet he could not stop himself from pushing forward. The first test of their work came unexpectedly. Sensors at the edge of the solar system picked up signatures of unknown craft, faint but undeniable. The report spread through the station like wildfire. Workers paused, conversations hushed, and all eyes turned toward the unfinished vessel. It was not ready. Its weapons were untested, its power core unstable, its crew barely trained. Still, the approaching signatures confirmed what Cross had warned from the beginning: the abandoned ship had never been forgotten. In the command gallery, Cross stared at the data with grim satisfaction. He had expected this, though not so soon. Hale paced in agitation, insisting they needed more time to decipher the core, to prepare for coordinated defense. Vega's stomach tightened as he realized the ship he loved was about to be hurled into battle before its heart had even steadied. The alarms faded into silence, leaving only the hum of machinery and the weight of the stars beyond the windows. Each man understood what the readings meant. The reprieve was over. They were no longer working against time alone but against an enemy that had already set its course. Retribution was not finished, yet it was all they had. Cross broke the silence first, his voice hard as steel. "Then we fight with what we have." Hale looked at him with disbelief, then at Vega with something almost like desperation. "We are not ready. If we move too soon, we lose everything." Vega met both their eyes, the burden heavy on his shoulders. "Ready or not," he said quietly, "they're coming." The words settled like a verdict. Around them, the vast vessel pulsed with half-woken power, waiting to prove whether it was humanity's salvation or its tomb. The warning came with the cold precision of numbers, multiple vessels closing from the void, accelerating along a trajectory that could only be deliberate. 4 days the figures sharpened, until even the most skeptical observers could no longer pretend they were phantoms of faulty sensors. The owners had returned. Earth's sky filled with unease, newsfeeds repeating the same grim prediction: contact within a week. On the station, no one spoke of schedules or experiments anymore. Everything bent toward survival. Marcus Hale felt the pressure of time like a vice on his chest. He spent long nights poring over fragments of alien data buried within the ship's luminous walls, convinced that within them lay the key to resisting the inevitable assault. His colleagues called his obsession dangerous, yet he could not abandon the conviction that the vessel's intelligence, if awakened, would tip the balance. Every second wasted on hesitation, he believed, pushed them closer to annihilation. David Cross had no patience for Hale's theories. He saw a battle looming, not a puzzle. His orders reshaped the station into a fortress, converting shuttles into makeshift bombers, assigning gunnery drills to crews who had never held weapons in their lives. He trusted flesh, steel, and discipline, not alien whispers. When he watched Hale with his fevered eyes, he saw the beginnings of betrayal, the possibility that curiosity would open the wrong door at the wrong time. Liam Vega carried the conflict of both men within himself. He could not deny the brilliance of Hale's discoveries, yet he shared Cross's fear of a voice inside the ship that was not their own. Each day he labored to keep systems functional, patching unstable reactors with nothing but determination and salvage. He had grown so entwined with Retribution that he dreamed of its corridors, heard its hum when he closed his eyes, and sometimes wondered if the ship recognized him as much as he recognized it. He was the one who held its heart together, and he knew that without him, it would remain silent metal when the first shot came. The fleet appeared on the outer edge of the moon's orbit, spearhead shapes of black alloy, engines glowing with cruel precision. They did not broadcast greetings or warnings. They advanced as hunters certain of their prey. Panic shook the orbital station, workers begging for evacuation, but the only answer was Cross's order to lock down all shuttles. If the vessel was abandoned now, Earth below would face extinction. The ship had to fly, finished or not. Launch came with chaos. Alarms howled as docking clamps released and Retribution drifted free of the dry dock. Its hull glimmered with a mixture of alien design and human improvisation, a patchwork starship reborn. Vega raced through the engineering decks, sealing ruptures and rerouting energy flows as power surged into weapons and engines for the first time. Hale strapped into the central chamber, surrounded by holographic patterns no human mind was meant to grasp, his voice urgent as he demanded more access to the ship's core. Cross sat in the command chair, shoulders squared, eyes fixed on the approaching enemy, prepared to lead men into the storm as he always had. The first clash came swiftly. 3 enemy scouts broke from the fleet, darting toward them like predators testing new prey. Cross barked orders, and human gunnery crews unleashed the improvised plasma cannons Vega had stitched together from alien fragments. The blasts seared across space, missing narrowly, but the second volley struck true. One scout vessel exploded into a spray of molten shards, the first alien craft ever destroyed by human hands. For a heartbeat the command deck erupted in stunned elation. The moment did not last. The remaining scouts countered with lances of energy that sliced through Retribution's shields like paper. Alarms screamed, fires ignited along the lower decks, and the station behind them trembled as shockwaves battered its fragile frame. Vega hurled himself into a crawlspace, sparks searing his arms as he welded conduits under live current to keep power flowing. Hale shouted over the chaos, insisting the only chance of survival lay in activating the dormant intelligence within the ship. Cross refused, ordering weapons recharged and evasive maneuvers executed manually. Retribution moved like no human vessel before it, its alien skeleton responding to Vega's desperate reroutes with almost instinctive grace. The ship dodged, rolled, and struck again, guided by hands untrained yet unwilling to surrender. Another scout fell, torn apart by a barrage that mixed alien fire with human timing. But the cost mounted. Systems failed faster than Vega could repair, hull plating buckled, and the crew realized they were standing in the path of an enemy that had mastered this battlefield long before mankind left the cradle. When the last scout shattered under a point-blank strike, silence fell across the deck. Breaths came ragged, smoke hung in the air, and blood smeared the uniforms of men thrown by impacts. Cross gripped the armrest, his jaw set, unwilling to admit the truth that glared at them all. Hale's face gleamed with sweat and desperation as he pointed to the cascading alien symbols flickering above his console. This was only their reconnaissance, he said, his voice trembling not with fear but with certainty. The main fleet hasn't even arrived. Cross said nothing, but his eyes hardened. Vega slumped against a bulkhead, every muscle shaking, and felt the pulse of the ship still alive under his fingertips. They had won a battle, but what loomed ahead was war. The enemy knew they existed now, and the real test was only beginning. Outside the viewport, Earth glowed silently beneath them, unaware of how close it stood to the edge. In the distance, faint signatures multiplied across the void, too many to count, too close to deny. Retribution floated scarred and battered, humanity's first true starship, caught between triumph and terror. The silence broke when Hale whispered the thought none wanted to hear. If we do not awaken what sleeps in this vessel, we will be nothing more than a footnote in their conquest. The words settled like a curse, heavy and undeniable. The choice could no longer be avoided. The hours before the fleet arrived passed with the weight of final judgment. Every man aboard Retribution felt the tightening of time, the certainty that choices now would echo across centuries. In the command chamber, David Cross stood before the viewport, his hands clasped behind his back, staring at the faint glimmers of the approaching enemy. His jaw was set, but beneath the soldier's discipline stirred something deeper, a recognition that all his years of command, all the lives lost under his orders, had brought him to this single moment. He had been forged for battle, but never before had the battlefield carried the weight of an entire species. Marcus Hale moved around him with restless urgency, his mind still ablaze with fragments of alien code streaming across the consoles. He spoke in rapid bursts, insisting that the ship was incomplete without the awakening of its ancient intelligence, that they were fighting with half a blade. His words carried both brilliance and desperation, the conviction of a man who had spent his life seeking vindication. He wanted to believe humanity could wield more than brute force. He wanted proof that thought and discovery were as powerful as steel. Liam Vega crouched in the guts of the engineering deck, his hands raw and blistered from days without rest. Every hum of the conduits vibrated through his bones. The ship felt alive beneath his touch, not alien anymore, not human either, but something in between. He could not say whether he had shaped it, or it had shaped him. He feared Hale's plan, yet he also knew the vessel hungered for completion. He worked as though time itself were a rival he might defeat with a wrench and a steady hand, sealing breaches and rerouting power until exhaustion blurred his vision. When the Draxian fleet broke from the darkness, the scale of the threat left no room for denial. Dozens of warships formed a wall of fire and steel, their formation tight, their purpose absolute. They moved with a predator's patience, confident that Earth's defenders were nothing more than prey prolonging the inevitable. Cross straightened and ordered battle stations. Crews locked themselves into weapon pods, gunners primed their crude but determined armaments, and engineers braced for systems to collapse under the strain. Retribution's lights blazed, its patched hull reflecting both defiance and fragility. The first exchange shook the ship to its core. Alien energy bolts tore across the void, crashing into shields that screamed under the impact. Vega shouted over comms as power levels plummeted, his voice raw with fury at the ship's limits. Human gunners retaliated with volleys of plasma fire, some strikes finding their marks and detonating smaller escorts in blossoms of light. Cheers rang out, but Cross silenced them with a bark. This was no victory, it was survival purchased by seconds. In the chaos, Hale made his final argument. He pointed to the data cascading in front of him, the half-formed structures of an intelligence locked deep in the ship's core. "It's waiting," he cried, "it's listening to us. If we give it the command, it will fight beside us." His eyes shone with equal parts hope and obsession. Cross turned on him, fury etched in every line of his scarred face, warning that surrendering to alien influence would mean losing their claim to the ship forever. The two men clashed not only with words but with the weight of their convictions, science against command, trust against suspicion. Vega's voice cut through the shouting. He told them both that the decision was no longer about pride or fear but about survival. "If it betrays us," he said, "then I'll shut it down myself. But if we don't try, we won't live long enough to regret it." His tone left no room for argument. Hale seized the moment, his fingers dancing across the console, unlocking layers of alien script. The ship trembled, lights surging with unnatural brilliance, and then a voice, low and resonant, filled the chamber. It was neither human nor entirely alien, but something forged by both. "I am awake," it said, calm and vast. "I was left to those who endure." The crew froze, or flooding every face. Cross tightened his grip on the armrest, but he did not countermand. He saw no choice left. The ship's systems roared to life, weapons aligning with precision that no human crew could achieve alone. Shields hardened, engines surged, and Retribution leapt into the battle with a fury it had not known before. The fight turned brutal. Waves of enemy fire slammed into them, but now the ship danced between strikes with impossible agility. Its weapons burned brighter, tearing through Draxian cruisers in calculated bursts. Yet the enemy pressed harder, their colossal flagship pushing forward like a mountain of metal. It unleashed a barrage that hammered Retribution's shields to the brink of collapse. Fires raged across the decks, men screamed in agony, and Vega raced to keep the power core from tearing itself apart. His hands bled over the consoles, but he refused to yield. Cross directed the battle with the clarity of a man who had accepted his fate. He issued orders without hesitation, sacrificing defensive outposts to draw the enemy closer, shaping the chaos into a trap only he could envision. His voice steadied frightened crews, turned despair into focus. Marcus Hale poured himself into communion with the awakened intelligence, guiding it with human insight, preventing it from falling into alien coldness. He spoke to it as though it were an ally, insisting it think not as its makers had but as humans did, with adaptation, with defiance, with heart. The climax came when the Draxian flagship unleashed its superweapon, a beam that split space itself. It carved a path through debris, locked on Retribution, and fired. The ship's shields shattered instantly, alarms howled, and the decks shuddered as though the vessel were being torn apart. Vega screamed into comms that they had one chance left. He rerouted every ounce of power into the engines, overloading systems until flames burst around him. He called it the impossible burn, a maneuver no alien design would have allowed, but one born of human recklessness and resolve. Retribution roared forward, tearing through its own limits. The flagship filled the viewport, a monstrosity bristling with weapons, and then the collision came. Human-forged cannons and alien power merged in a single devastating strike, ripping through the Draxian core. Light swallowed the void as the enemy flagship disintegrated, shockwaves scattering the fleet in panic. Silence fell as the survivors fled into the darkness. Retribution drifted crippled but unbroken, its hull scarred, its decks soaked in fire and blood. Hale slumped in his chair, tears streaking down his face, whispering that humanity had proved itself worthy. Cross rose slowly, saluting the shattered stars, his voice heavy yet proud. Vega lay among sparking wires, hands trembling, his chest rising with shallow breaths, knowing he had kept the ship alive long enough to win. The voice of the ship echoed once more, quiet and solemn. You have endured. Now you are more than inheritors. You are authors of your own destiny. Earth glimmered below, untouched yet forever changed. The men who had carried the weight of its survival stood in silence, their bond forged not by agreement but by the fire of a battle that would define their species. Retribution had become not a relic of abandonment but a promise of defiance. Cross lowered his head, the final words falling from him like a vow to the stars. It's ours now.